They told us it was over. They told us it was just a Cold War experiment, a mistake of the past. But what if I told you that the darkest government program in US history never truly ended? That the ability to erase memories, control thoughts, and create human weapons was not just a theory, but a reality. This is the story of MK Ultra, the experiment that went too far, the program they tried to erase, and the terrifying possibility that it never really stopped. There are secrets buried so deep in history that even the most powerful governments fear their exposure. Documents shredded, files erased, and testimonies silenced. But some things refuse to stay hidden. Between the 1950s and 1970s, the United States government orchestrated one of the most disturbing and unethical human experiments in history. A classified project operating under the radar, aimed at unlocking the most terrifying power of all, the ability to control the human mind. It was called MK Ultra, a name that sounds like science fiction, but the horrors behind it were very real. The program was initiated under the guise of national security. The Cold War had ignited paranoia within the CIA. What if enemy nations had already developed methods of brainwashing? What if soldiers, spies, or even world leaders could be manipulated without their knowledge? The US couldn't afford to fall behind. And so, in the darkness of secret laboratories, hidden research facilities, and even everyday hospitals, the experiments began. There were no rules, no ethics, no limits. Psychologists, scientists, and covert operatives were given free rein to explore the boundaries of the human mind. Drugs, hypnosis, electroshock therapy, sleep deprivation. Every possible method of breaking a person's will was tested, but what started as research soon turned into something far more sinister. Victims, many of them unwitting participants, were subjected to horrifying procedures. Some were prisoners, others were patients in mental institutions, soldiers, and even ordinary citizens. Many had no idea they were being used as test subjects. The goal: to erase memories, to implant new thoughts, to create programmable human beings, people who could be controlled like puppets without ever realizing it. And perhaps the most terrifying part of all is that they might have succeeded. For years, the project remained in the shadows, but in the 1970s, a series of leaks and investigations threatened to expose everything. The CIA was desperate. Before the truth could come to light, they ordered the destruction of almost all MK Ultra documents. What remains today is only a fragment of the horror that once was. But if this is only the tip of the iceberg, what secrets still lie beneath? To understand the horrors of MK Ultra, we must go back to where it all began, an era of paranoia, power struggles, and a government willing to cross any ethical boundary in the name of national security. The year was 1953. The Cold War was in full swing, and the United States believed it was locked in a psychological arms race with the Soviet Union. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy nations were experimenting with mind control, using hypnosis, hallucinogenic drugs, and psychological torture to manipulate individuals. The CIA was convinced that if America didn't act fast, it would fall behind in a war that wasn't fought with bullets, but with the mind itself. And so, under the approval of CIA Director Allen Dulles, Project MK Ultra was born. It was placed under the command of Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist with a fascination for the potential of altering human consciousness. But the truth was, even within the CIA, few truly knew the extent of what was about to happen. With virtually unlimited funding and complete secrecy, the project rapidly expanded. It wasn't limited to just one facility. It spread across universities, hospitals, military bases, and even private institutions. The research was fragmented into dozens of sub-projects, each exploring a different method of breaking and reshaping the human mind. The idea was simple. If the CIA could understand how to destroy a person's free will, they could then rebuild it however they pleased. One of the most infamous tools of their experiments was LSD, an unpredictable, mind-altering substance that could dissolve reality itself. The CIA saw it as a potential truth serum, a tool for interrogation, and even a weapon that could render entire enemy populations mentally unstable. At first, they tested it on volunteers, soldiers, government agents, and even scientists within their own ranks. But soon, they needed more subjects, more unsuspecting minds to manipulate. And that's when things took a darker turn. Innocent civilians became test subjects without ever knowing it. Mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, even random individuals on the street. The CIA set up fake clinics, disguised agents as doctors, and laced drinks with LSD at bars and restaurants, all to observe how unsuspecting minds would react. What happened to those people? Many were left permanently damaged. Some lost their sanity. Others disappeared entirely. The government justified it under the name of national security. But how far could they go before crossing a line that could never be undone? What if your thoughts weren't really yours? What if your memories could be erased, rewritten, or replaced? In the darkest corners of history, the CIA believed this was not just possible, it was necessary. And their ultimate weapon was a simple, colorless, tasteless liquid, LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, a substance so powerful that a single drop could fracture reality itself. In the 1950s, it was still a mystery, an untapped chemical capable of unlocking the deepest corridors of the human mind. And to the CIA, it was the key to absolute control. MKUltra's obsession with LSD began as an experiment in truth serums. Could it force prisoners of war to confess? Could it make spies reveal state secrets? Could it break a person's mind so completely that they could be rebuilt from scratch? But soon the objectives became even more disturbing. The CIA didn't just want to extract information. They wanted to create something new, soldiers who obeyed without question, assassins who killed without hesitation, human beings whose minds could be programmed like machines. The experiments escalated. The drug was administered in controlled environments. At first, small, enclosed rooms, darkened chambers. Patients strapped to chairs, wires attached to their skulls. Their pupils dilated, their perception of time and space dissolving into madness. But then, the CIA pushed further. They began testing it in the real world. Unwitting civilians were dosed in bars, in coffee shops, in their own homes. They would wake up with no memory of what had happened, their minds fragmented, their sanity hanging by a thread. And no one, not even the victims, knew they were part of an experiment. And then came the worst part, the psychological torture. LSD was only one piece of the puzzle. The real horror was what came next. Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, extreme isolation. Subjects were locked in soundproof rooms, their brains bombarded with repeated messages for hours, days, even weeks at a time. They were told they were no longer themselves, that their past was a lie, that their thoughts were not their own. Some subjects resisted, others broke completely. There were reports of people regressing into childlike states, unable to recognize their own names. Some had their memories completely wiped, blank slates, ready to be rewritten. And then there were the ones who never came back. Some say these experiments created the perfect sleeper agents, people programmed to carry out missions without ever knowing they had been programmed at all. Others believe the CIA lost control, that they pushed too far, breaking minds that could never be repaired. The documents on these cases destroyed, the witnesses silenced, and the truth still buried beneath layers of secrecy. But the most terrifying question remains: did MKUltra ever truly end? Or is it still happening under a different name, hidden in plain sight? In the shadows of government laboratories and psychiatric hospitals, behind locked doors and soundproof walls, there were people, men and women who had no idea they were part of something that would haunt history forever. The victims of MKUltra were not volunteers. They were prisoners, mental patients, soldiers, addicts, drifters, anyone who the CIA deemed expendable. To them, these people weren't human subjects. They were test dummies, empty shells to be broken, studied, and discarded. One of the most infamous test sites was the Allen Memorial Institute in Canada under the direction of Dr. Ewan Cameron. Cameron was no ordinary scientist. He believed that the mind could be completely erased and rewritten from scratch. His patients, many of whom came in for minor psychological issues, were unknowingly subjected to nightmarish treatments. Massive doses of LSD, prolonged sensory deprivation, repeated electroshock therapy so intense it wiped away their memories. Some patients were kept in drug-induced comas for weeks, even months. Their brains turned into blank slates. When they woke up, if they woke up, they had no recollection of who they were. But the CIA's experiments didn't stop in hospitals. They spread into prisons, where inmates were promised shorter sentences in exchange for participating in harmless research. They were given unknown drugs, subjected to hypnosis, forced into states of extreme paranoia. Many were never the same again. And then there were the ordinary citizens, innocent men and women who became test subjects without ever knowing it. In San Francisco, New York, and other major cities, the CIA launched Operation Midnight Climax, a horrifying sub-project where unsuspecting people were drugged in bars and brothels. The agency set up hidden cameras, watching as their victims lost control of their minds. Some subjects experienced complete psychotic breaks. Others were found wandering the streets, confused, terrified, unable to recall who they were or how they got there, and some simply disappeared. One name stands out among the casualties of MK-Ultra, Frank Olson, a CIA scientist who, according to official reports, committed suicide in 1953 after being secretly dosed with LSD by his own colleagues. But decades later, new evidence suggested something far more sinister. His death wasn't a suicide. He had been silenced, murdered, because he knew too much. The CIA would later claim that these experiments were necessary for national security. But how many lives were shattered in the process? How many victims were erased, not just from memory, but from existence itself? And if this is what we know, what horrors are still buried in classified files, never meant to see the light of day? The ability to control the human mind, to erase memories, to implant new thoughts, to create the perfect soldier, the perfect spy, the perfect assassin, one who obeys without question, who kills without hesitation, and who never remembers what they've done. This was the ultimate goal of MK-Ultra. But somewhere along the way, the experiments spiraled out of control. As the CIA delved deeper into the darkest corners of psychological warfare, the tests became more extreme. LSD and electroshock therapy were only the beginning. Researchers explored more invasive methods, psychotropic drugs that could induce total amnesia, sensory deprivation chambers where subjects would float in complete isolation for days, and even techniques to split a person's mind into multiple, programmable identities. One of the most disturbing theories? The creation of Manchurian candidates, individuals who could be programmed to carry out assassinations with no recollection of their orders. Imagine a person so deeply conditioned that a single phrase, a specific sound, or even a gesture could trigger them to kill. Science fiction, maybe. But leaked documents suggest that the CIA was far closer to achieving this than they ever admitted. The testing sites stretched across the world. Secret facilities in Canada, the United Kingdom, and even Germany, some linked to former Nazi scientists recruited under Operation Paperclip. These men had experience with human experimentation, and the CIA was more than willing to use their knowledge to push the limits of psychological control. Victims who underwent these extreme trials often emerged as shattered individuals. Some were left permanently insane, Others had no memory of the weeks, months, or even years they had lost inside MKUltra's hidden labs. And then there were those who vanished without a trace. Now, could the CIA really have created mind-controlled assassins? Some believe the answer lies in real-world events, the mysterious behavior of certain lone gunmen, high-profile murders that seem too perfectly executed, cases where the killers had no recollection of their actions. Was MKUltra responsible? Or is the real truth something even darker, something that to this day remains locked away in classified files? Because if they succeeded in turning the human brain into a programmable weapon, what makes you think they ever stopped? Secrets this dark can never stay buried forever. No matter how deep governments try to hide them, no matter how many documents are destroyed, the truth always finds a way to the surface. And when the world first caught a glimpse of MKUltra, it was too horrifying to ignore. The 1970s marked a turning point in American history. After the Vietnam War, after Watergate, the public's trust in the government was crumbling. People began asking questions about surveillance, about corruption, and about the shadowy experiments rumored to have been conducted on innocent citizens. And then, in 1974, journalist Seymour Hersh published an article in the New York Times that sent shockwaves through the nation. He exposed a chilling truth. The CIA had been illegally conducting mind control experiments on Americans for decades. The public was outraged. How could something like this happen? How deep did the deception go? The government had no choice but to respond. In 1975, the US Senate launched the Church Committee, an official investigation into intelligence abuses. High-ranking CIA officials were called to testify, forced to answer questions they had never expected to face in public. But just when it seemed like the full truth might finally come to light, the CIA did the unthinkable. In a desperate attempt to cover their tracks, the agency ordered the destruction of almost all MKUltra documents. Entire archives were reduced to ash, thousands of pages of classified research erased forever. What little remained was incomplete, fragments of a nightmare, pieces of a puzzle that could never be fully solved. Former CIA Director Richard Helms personally gave the order to destroy the files, ensuring that the most damning evidence would never be found. The agency claimed it had nothing to hide, but if that were true, why go to such extreme lengths to erase history? Despite the mass purge of evidence, some records survived. Testimonies from victims, financial documents linking the CIA to illegal experiments, and declassified memos proved one thing beyond any doubt. MKUltra was real, and it was far worse than anyone had imagined. But here's the most disturbing part. When the investigation ended, no one was truly held accountable. No high-ranking officials faced criminal charges. No victims received justice. The case was quietly closed, and the world was expected to move on. And maybe we did. But the ghosts of MKUltra never truly disappeared. Because if the government was willing to destroy that much evidence to protect its secrets, what else is still hidden? The US government claims MKUltra ended in 1973. They assure us that the experiments stopped, that no further mind control research was conducted, that those dark days are nothing more than a relic of the past. But can we really believe that? If history has taught us anything, it's that power is never easily surrendered. And when a government discovers the ability to manipulate the human mind, do you really think they would just stop? Officially, MKUltra was shut down, but many researchers believe that its most successful techniques simply went underground, rebranded under new names, hidden within classified operations that continue to this day. After all, if they had already crossed every moral and ethical boundary, what would stop them from continuing? In fact, leaked documents suggest that the research into psychological warfare, subliminal messaging, and behavior modification never truly ended. Programs like Project Monarch and MK Search supposedly carried on where MKUltra left off, exploring even deeper methods of psychological manipulation. And then, there are the real-world cases, strange assassinations. Lone gunmen who, after committing high-profile murders, claim to have no memory of their actions. Mass shooters with eerily similar backgrounds, isolated individuals, sudden mental breaks, and no clear motive. Could some of these people have been programmed? Could they be the modern-day Manchurian candidates that MK Ultra once sought to create? And what about the entertainment industry? Some theorists believe that elements of MK Ultra were adapted for mass manipulation, hidden in music, television, and digital media to subtly influence public perception. After all, if the CIA could control an individual mind, why not an entire population? Of course, to most people, these are just conspiracy theories, wild speculation. But here's the problem. When the government has already admitted to one of the most horrific human experiments in history, how much of the conspiracy is really that far-fetched? We may never know the full extent of MK Ultra's legacy. The files are gone. The witnesses are dead. The experiments that were uncovered were only the tip of the iceberg. But if mind control was possible back then, imagine how much more advanced it could be today. And so the final question remains, did MK Ultra truly end, or did it just evolve into something far more terrifying?